I apologize if this is a bit bleak. I'll try not to make it so. I begin with a reading from A Better Human Story by Andrew Bard Schmuckler, who was a candidate for Congress in Virginia in 2017. He is a writer, a politician, and a very thoughtful individual who provides us with an opening context for today's talk. The human story is not specifically a story about evil. It should be understood as a story of a creature that, like all life, strives toward the fulfillment of life's needs. In doing so, humans tend to introduce and unleash into their world a force of brokenness, with the result that for millennium, the world has had to contend with the problem of evil. The new form of life, civilized society, that arose inevitably precipitates a new kind of disorder into the human world. And this new kind of disorder delivers a powerful and lasting impetus of a kind of brokenness into the human world. Brokenness moves through the human system. The essential concept for understanding the reality of an evil force or a destructive force is the idea of a pattern of brokenness. What do a war and people traumatized by a war have in common? One displays brokenness at the intersocietal system, while the other one is brokenness at the level of the person, at the psyche of the individual. Schmuckler writes that knowing this impetus, which is part of brokenness, is important. War, anxiety, system injustice, racism, xenophobia, greed. These forms of impetus toward brokenness can be seen moving through the human system like through time, like a wave moving through water. The wave works through the water, but it is not the water. The wave we see moving crosswise, even if the water itself does not. Each bit of water does its thing in place while the wave moves on. It works similarly with brokenness in the human world. We tend to look at brokenness at the concrete level, the personal level, like, say, Donald Trump. Brokenness on the human scale, and thus readily visible, important, and certainly interesting. But to understand evil, we must perceive more than the water we're standing in. We must look at the wave moving through the system over time, the wave that transmits the energy derived from some impetus that entered into the sea, the inevitable anarchy, the inevitable struggle for power, the inevitable methods of how to exert power, fear and hatred being the strongest, the brokenness of civilized society shaped by the requirements for power, the hostility that accompanies such things, and the demands that get internalized and put humans at war with themselves and with their environment. The wave in motion, brokenness in motion, evil, injustice. The central drama in the human story is when the force of wholeness has to contend with the force of brokenness, and we all suffer. Sorry about that. So the talk. And so I start this talk on a snowy Sunday morning with gloom and doom. It seems inevitable to do so. Recently, like so many others, I have substantially limited my intake of news from radio, the screen, and the press. I can tolerate smaller doses of news, and by news, I mean verifiable, professional presentations with thoughtful, informed analysis. Those smaller doses are from the New York Times or the Associated Press or other world sources of information like Deutsche Welle or the BBC. The in-depth coverage of PBS or NPR sends me scurrying out of the room wondering, given the magnitude and intensity of bad news, how in heaven's name do reporters keep sane? Please don't assume I would rather contemplate my navel, chant Om, and try in vain or with a large dose of naivete to believe I can distance myself or make the troubles of the world go away. I cannot. I cannot miraculously fix injustices of the world because I've succeeded in aligning my cosmic energies with whatever. I just can't do that. I can't do just that. What can I do? What can we do? Andrew Schmuckler thinks we should be creating a context that allows us to see things conceptually, not religiously, as in God versus Lucifer, or the huge battle of good versus evil. Instead, he urges us to find a theme, a context, a way to move through a strong, thoughtful vision into a plan of action, to fix brokenness, as it were. First, we begin with embracing reality. The gloom and doom I refer to is real and does not disappear by ignoring it, nor by indulging ourselves in excessive material pleasures. Second, it is no sin or shirking off responsibility if I or anyone else does seek a source of quietude, escape, calming renewal, or anything that helps to refresh and recharge us. Pleasure, meditative or thoughtful periods of calm are good. So is healthy occasional diversion. Third, and this is the most important thing we need to consider this morning, we need to understand the sources of our environmental, psychological, and social calamities that cause war, injustice, inequality, and perverse destruction. These reign over all of us. In finding the sources of these problems, we need to define them as our problems, all of us, not just problems created by evil, which we can conveniently hate, rage against, or try to push away from us. We cannot say, they are bad, disgusting, worth condemning. We are good, righteous, different, better. That approach doesn't work. That duality doesn't work. Water is continuous and contiguous. To understand the source of our problems, we need to understand evil. Schmuckler finds evil is spawned by brokenness within our civilization. True, true, and again true. Humans get together and then tend to contaminate their natural desire to survive and thrive by tainted ideologies, hatreds, fears, sexism, fears, excluding behavior, fears, etc. There are countless ideas about evil. In the chapter on the struggle with evil, contained in the compilation called God in All Worlds, the authors begin by discussing other definitions. Those being, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy speaks of two kinds of evil: broad acts of evil and narrow ones. Broad actions are political, are large sweeping movements or trends that are motivated by evil or natural evil events, implying destruction on a grand scale, such as the devastating fire or catastrophic weather events. Narrow expressions of evil are personal. As I look further into philosophy, philosophy is not very helpful to me. Too many categorizations and arguments. Is the evildoer frail, weak-willed, imperfect, perverse? Is he or she a psychopath? Were they brought up badly, or are they just ignorant? The only helpful philosopher I found was a Holocaust writer, Hannah Arendt. She wrote a major work called The Origins of Totalitarianism in 1951. She wrote something that made perfect sense to me, that evil occurs when people go about, quote, making human beings as human beings superfluous. So the constructs of civilization and society become more important than those for whom the constructs were made. We began this country's experiment in societal governance with very big lettering. We the people. I guess that has gotten lost in all our brokenness. And so injustice is born. Why bother working for better low-income housing for anyone here in Quincy? Quote, those people should just become Jacksonville or Hannibal's problem, unquote. Why equalize the boundaries for elementary schools in Quincy according to race, income, and special education needs? This community has always, by tradition, kept that street or this street as the natural boundaries to keep those children together, and by implication, away from these children. Why bother considering children and civilians killed in Gaza or Ukraine, regardless of who does the killing? Those little people are just collateral damage, in the way as a relentless string of past abuses ignite violence, or some brute in Moscow goes looking for Nazis, or a big army just bombs its way through people's homes to root out hidden enemies like rats in a sewer line. Why bother being concerned about gun violence and mass shooting? As Trump states, we should just get over it. Why bother about inequalities of education, healthcare, income, marriage rights, where and how one might live in another country, how one might take care of their own bodies? People seeking these rights are lesser. They are amoral sexual freaks. They are not white. They are ignorant of the English language. They are dirty, stupid, lazy, human beings made superfluous. Mostly they are getting away of what those on top prefer to keep all to themselves. This is my personal definition of injustice. It starts by denying personhood, and what is done to anyone as a person. That's injustice. So what about those who perpetrate evil or simply condone or support an evil individual or action? They're people as well. How have we gotten so far apart, hating groups of one another, hating by regions, being so broken? The actions of evil at its best are bent on destroying the significance of personal, spiritual relationships and the growing of interest of humans to try to unite in equality, person to person, in the sexes, in race, in culture, and across nations. Not with sameness, but with equality. When we fight against each other, even someone spouting or acting out hatefulness and inflicting the pain of evil or condoning such evil, we are not acknowledging the evil in ourselves that seeks to separate. We become part of the wave. Believe me, I don't trust myself to be in the same room with Donald Trump or Putin. I would immediately find myself guilty of homicide. I am repelled. To quote Martin Israel from The Dark Face of Reality, quote, deceitfulness, perverse sexual behavior, stealing, and increasing destructiveness are typical features of the breakdown of someone's personality, exhibited by the likes of these two men. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a person who wrote of the strength to love, undoubtedly recognized such personifications in his own time. Quote, is anything more obvious than the presence of evil in the universe, he wrote. Its nagging, prehensile tentacles project into every level of human existence. We may debate the origin of evil, but only a victim of superficial optimism would debate its reality. It is stark, grim, and colossally real. It permeates the human race, unquote. but it is not who we are. Evil is also found in global climate degradation, and in so much as it is caused by human society with our love of material comfort and our love affair with petroleum. It is a global evil and injustice. I am occasionally of homicidal intent, as I have stated, and I hate plastic as much as I am dependent upon it. Here, it is not some other megalomaniac I can blame. We ourselves are comfortably partaking in this dead-ended consumption. To rid ourselves or reform ourselves collectively as a society is monumental. The critical mass needed to wake up to reform and renewal might occur, but hopefully when it's not too late. Monumentally, that's another story, the environment, another source of injustice. But the magnitude of that problem does not excuse us from at least trying to do something. Getting back to our human leaders of evil and injustice and their blind and not so blind followers, how do we deal with this problem? What draws followers to follow so readily, to ignore facts and to turn a blind eye to injustice? What makes these followers tick? We must understand this, or we must try. Otherwise, the risk is further division and alienation from one another and more injustice. Certain so-called leaders have brought this challenge into very clear focus. It pays to see what might make them tick. Here's an idea. Says M. Scott Peck in The People of the Lie. From their actions, evil leaders deny the suffering of their guilt, the painful awareness of their sin, inadequacy, and imperfection, by casting their pain onto others through projection and scapegoating. They themselves may not suffer, but those around them do. They cause suffering. The evil created under their dominion is a miniature, sick society. They perhaps direct as much energy into their devious rationalizations and destructive compensations as the healthiest do into loving behavior. Why? What possesses these leaders? What drives them? Basically, says Peck, it is fear. They are terrified that the pretense will break down and they will be exposed to the world and themselves. They are continually frightened that they will come face to face with their own evil. Of all emotions, he says, fear is the most painful. These people, these leaders, are themselves broken. It is exactly for this reason they are a force against the natural tendency of human beings to seek wholeness. Think about this. Projecting this fear onto their followers by making their followers fear other people just like them. Followers are afraid of losing what little they have or of others who desire what they have, of impinging upon them or threatening them. Followers of such evil people need the lie more than anything else, that they are wronged, that they are threatened, that they are in danger. They need their less than news sources carefully groomed, skillfully altered, and palatably geared toward giving them solidarity and loyalty without thinking. Forget the leaders. How do we expose the truth? How do we open ears, which must be opened before hearts are opened? How do we break through and past cult behavior? The only way to fight back is to present a holistic concept, even more appealing than "Make America Great Again." Catchy, but destructively broken. Here's how Peck describes the needed positive skills as embodied by the ideal human, one who aspires to see human beings in the real human being in the human being. Quote, there are a sufficient number of men and women in all cultures and at all times who have achieved their full adulthood in a kind of gracefulness of existence, so that we can generally say of them, they have become truly human, by which their lives seem almost to touch on divine. We can study these people. We can examine their characteristics. Briefly, they are all wise and aware. They experience life with gusto, yet face and accept death. They do not only work productively, they work creatively, and they obviously love their fellow human beings, whom they lead with a benign sense of both intent and result. In other words, they are whole. Peck continues, what fills these people with equanimity and purpose is the knowledge that though evil is morally and unjust, it is at its root an illness. It is the ultimate illness. Evil, like a wound left unwashed, is easily attracted to the neurotic and psychotic aspects of the individual. Like a festering wound, evil loses its power when it is exposed to light, like darkness. Calling it darkness is a visual representation, a void, something we can viscerally understand. Evil is also understood as something that in that darkness, something one can feel in darkness, like pain or destruction, like a carrier or a pestilence, or a broken, useless cancer that never correctly reproduces, but just spreads with terminal greed. As a strategy against evil, the most important thing to remember is because it is an illness, hatred of evil does not diminish it. Hatred increases it. The remedy is for a positive presence to assert itself. In the aftermath of World War I, the victorious took upon themselves the task of hating and punishing Germany with a passion. In the 1920s, the victorious plunged that country into prolonged debt and poverty. The people of Germany suffered and became ripe for anyone and any idea that took their side. A number of children in Germany in the 1920s were greatly aided by a very generous group of English men and women. They were followers of one George Fox, the Society of Friends, they called themselves. They attended the children. Merely 20 years later, the Friends came back to Germany, Nazi Germany, seeking to help Allied prisoners of war. The Nazis, Gestapo as well, allowed the Friends access to Allied prisoners. When the Friends helped Jews and other persecuted groups, the Nazis tend to let them off with merely a beating and not with imprisonment or execution. Why? These same guards were once the children who survived starvation because of George Fox's followers. Immediately following World War II, with Nazi guards and Gestapo now in Allied prisons, the Friends came back to help these former children who were now guilty, defeated men of shame. The Friends knew no sides, except those sides which required them to see humans as humans. Were they ignorant of evil? Hardly. Just good people who did make a difference. So should we feel charged to close the gap that exists in this country and around the world, we must work to present ideas in a fact-driven light, clearly, relentlessly, and with grace. We should pay homage to no one, nor should we openly disdain the homage others give to disreputable, evil persons or ideas. To be heard, we must listen, consider, think about the best way to respond. We should come to others bearing gifts, words, deeds, acts of kindness. Leading with what we have in common is a start. Small efforts to join forces where basic, simple human needs or the needs of the environment are to be addressed. These are places of common ground. Questioning a point here or there, raising an idea to view its consistency or lack thereof, carefully and with due respect, these small planted seeds are ways to chip away at ideas that are rigid. Above all, to remember that rigidity has been set in the hardest of concrete, fear, real, devious, cultivated fear. Let our small actions pave the way. Be out there when a need arises to do simple things that let others see them as human beings, just like yourself. Let them find a friend in someone who opposes the evil they embraced. A big rule to follow. Stay open to compromise, or simply stay open. It's not about us waving our special flag. It's not about us. Where we can agree enthusiastically, we should do so, because we are in fact actively seeking to find common ground. And common is the operative word. Schmuckler's water, not the wave. People and their struggle to live, not society's brokenness. That is the only ground on which we can stand together. Maybe another slogan. One nation for one America. When we feel like screaming in all of this, when the evil around us seems to like it will defeat our best efforts, it is good to remember that others greater than ourselves absorbed evil and lived through such times. Their persistence is what had an effect, not their rage. As indignant as they often felt, indignation increased their resolve toward good, and never against those who blindly or acted in ignorance or even selfishness. You attack the illness methodically, carefully, relentlessly, not the human being. For yourself, for ourselves, find comfort in what comforts you. Read, enjoy music, nature, whatever moves your soul. Seek those of like mind for deep friendship, companionship, and times to relax and renew. Have your own personal practice of something to rest in and retreat to when you need to. Just don't spend 24/7 in navel contemplation or turn into a hedonist, at least not permanently. Keep your anger short. Use the other edge of the blade. Humor, compassion, understanding. I have little else to say, except I often find myself at a loss to practice what I preach. Sometimes things infuriate me. People infuriate me. I cling to my occasional homicidal longings, but just in my futile dreams. The rest is a struggle, and often I feel as if my efforts will persist in being minimal, ineffectual, and hopelessly insufficient. But then I remember that it begins with a single person and with making them feel like a human being, at least for just a while. That's how brokenness is fixed. That's how wholeness begins. Then my living, growing dream is one similar to the thought paraphrased by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., loved by Obama, and originally stated by Unitarian minister Theodore Parker. Quote, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by consciousness. From what I see, I'm sure it bends toward justice. Blessed be our new year. Thank you.